I don't know why we thought it was a good idea. Maybe it was boredom, maybe we just wanted a thrill. But looking back, I wish we had never set foot in Black Hills National Forest that night. It started with a Reddit thread. Someone claimed there was a trail that didn't let you leave, a place where time folded in on itself. The deeper you went, the more you heard things that shouldn't exist. Of course, we laughed it off. Just another internet horror story, right? So we went. There were 5 of us, me, Liam, Zoe, Brandon, Kayla, and Marcus, and we arrived late in the afternoon. The trees stretched high, their twisted branches blocking out most of the sunlight. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something stale like an old rotting cabin. We barely noticed the old man near the trailhead at first. He was sitting on a rock, his face hidden beneath a hood. But as we passed, he muttered something under his breath. "It won't let you go." We stopped. "What did you say?" Kayla asked, her voice uneasy. The old man slowly lifted his head, revealing pale, cloudy eyes. "The trail, it keeps you. You'll see." Brandon chuckled. "Creepy. Nice touch." He patted my shoulder. "Come on, let's go before he starts charging us for ghost stories." I wish we had listened. At first, it was just a normal hike. The path was narrow, winding through towering pines, their branches tangled overhead. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Not just quiet, but wrong. No birds, no wind, no rustling leaves, just silence. After about an hour, we noticed the first sign of something being off. "Wait, haven't we passed this before?" Zoe pointed at a fallen tree, its roots gnarled like a hand reaching up from the dirt. "No way," Marcus said. "We've been going straight." But then we saw it again, and again. No matter which direction we took, we kept ending up right back at that tree. Brandon pulled out his phone, his face pale in the dimming light. "GPS says we're still moving forward, but the map hasn't changed." He turned the screen to me. The dot wasn't moving. Then came the whisper. It was so soft at first I thought I imagined it. But then Kayla grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The others froze. A voice, low and hushed, weaving through the trees. It wasn't words, not at first. Just a sound that curled in the back of my skull, making my skin prickle. Then it spoke. "Why are you here?" Kayla gasped, stepping back. Brandon laughed, but it was forced. "All right, whoever's messing with us, you got us. Time to stop." No one was messing with us, because that voice, it knew my name, and it knew things about me that no one else did. I turned to the others. Their faces were pale, their breaths shallow. They had heard their names too. Something was out there, watching, and it didn't want us to leave. Zoe was the first to disappear. 1 second she was right beside me, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The next she was gone. No scream, no sound. Just gone. "Zoe?" Kayla's voice cracked as she spun in place, her beam of light sweeping the trees. I turned in a full circle, my heart hammering. The air felt thick, heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on us. The whisper was louder now, slithering through the trees, speaking things we weren't meant to hear. Brandon took a shaky breath. She probably just... A snap. We all turned toward the sound. There, just beyond the trees, was Zoe's flashlight. It lay on the ground, the beam flickering as if something had drained the life from it. But Zoe wasn't there. Kayla took a hesitant step forward. Maybe she... Don't. Marcus grabbed her wrist. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. If she was okay, she would have answered us. He was right. We had been yelling her name over and over, and the only thing answering back was the whisper. Panic set in fast. "Okay, screw this," Brandon muttered, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling 911. No signal. Of course." Kayla clutched her arms, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "We have to go back, the way we came. Retrace our steps." Marcus nodded, and for once I agreed. We just needed to move. Fast. But as we turned back, something felt wrong. The trees had shifted. The path was gone. No, no, no. Brandon spun in place, shining his light at the ground, looking for footprints, but there weren't any. Like we had never been there at all. Then, the whisper changed. It wasn't distant anymore. It was right next to my ear. "I see you." I whipped around, my breath caught in my throat. There was nothing there. But Brandon? He stumbled back like he had been hit. His flashlight dropped to the ground, spinning wildly. His eyes widened, staring at something none of us could see. Then he screamed. It was a sound that cut through my spine, raw and broken. He clutched his head, shaking, gasping like something was inside him, whispering directly into his mind. We tried to grab him, to shake him out of it, but then... silence. Brandon was gone. Just his flashlight remained, still spinning in the dirt. And beyond it, deep in the trees, something watched us. Something with hollow eyes. Kayla was crying. Marcus stood frozen, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up and realize this was some sick hallucination. But it wasn't. Brandon was gone. Zoe was gone. And something was playing with us. The whisper returned, but now it wasn't just words. It was laughter. Soft, dry, and inhuman. Kayla grabbed my arm. "We can't stay here, we have to move. Now." Marcus nodded, his eyes darting through the trees. "We go in one direction. No stopping. No looking back." It sounded like a plan. It wasn't. We ran. Branches clawed at my face, my legs burned, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I needed to move. The whisper followed, weaving between the trees like a shadow that knew no form. Then Kayla screamed. I turned just in time to see hands emerge from the ground, pale and bony, wrapping around her ankles. She fell hard, clawing at the dirt, struggling, kicking. But the more she fought, the deeper she sank. Marcus lunged for her, grabbing her wrists, pulling with everything he had. But it didn't matter. Kayla's terrified eyes locked onto mine. "Don't let it take me," she begged. Then she was gone. The ground smoothed over like she had never been there. I wanted to throw up. Marcus and I stood there, breathless, shaking, the weight of what just happened crushing us. We were the last two left. And then Marcus whispered, "Look." I turned, and my stomach dropped. We were right back where we started, the trailhead. We had looped again. But this time, something stood there. A figure, tall, skeletal, its face stretched into something that wasn't quite human. Marcus grabbed my arm. "Run!" But we didn't get the chance. The whisper became a roar, flooding my mind, drowning out every thought, every instinct. My body froze. Marcus let out a choked gasp. Then, silence. I turned. He was gone. I was alone. But not really. Because now the whisper was inside me. It spoke with my own voice. And I knew then I would never leave. I never really feared the woods. I grew up surrounded by them. My grandfather taught me how to track, how to move silently, how to respect the land. Hunting wasn't just a sport to me. It was a way to escape, to reconnect with something primal. That's why, when I had a free weekend, I didn't think twice before heading to my grandfather's old cabin in Tongass National Forest. It had been years since I last visited, but I still remembered every twist in the trail, every landmark. By the time I arrived, the sun was already sinking behind the trees. The cabin stood just as I remembered, small, sturdy, tucked away deep in the woods. I unloaded my gear, checked the rifle, and set up for the night. Everything was normal, peaceful even. Then I noticed it, the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just nothing. I brushed it off, chalking it up to the cold setting in. But even as I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That night, I woke up to a sound outside. A slow, deliberate crack of a branch. I sat up, heart pounding. I wasn't about to let my mind play tricks on me. Grabbing my flashlight and rifle, I pushed open the door. At first, I saw nothing, just the quiet darkness of the forest. But then my light hit the ground and my stomach twisted. Footprints, big ones, barefoot, and they weren't mine. They circled the cabin. I scanned the tree line, half expecting to see someone or something standing there, but there was nothing. Just the cold night and the endless silence. I stepped back inside and locked the door. It was probably just some lunatic messing around, maybe a lost hiker. But why would a hiker be walking barefoot in the middle of nowhere? Morning couldn't come fast enough, and when it did, I found something worse. The footprints were closer, as if whoever it was had spent the night creeping toward my door. I didn't waste time. As soon as the sun was up, I grabbed my rifle and followed the tracks. If someone was messing with me, I wanted to know who. The footprints led deeper into the woods, weaving between trees, vanishing for a stretch before reappearing. Whoever, or whatever, made them wasn't moving like a lost hiker. They were deliberate, controlled, almost like they were leading me somewhere. After about a mile, I stumbled into a clearing. That's when I saw them, the trees. They were covered in carvings, strange, twisting symbols I didn't recognize. Some were deep, almost hacked into the bark with a blade. Others were more precise, etched with eerie care. I ran my fingers over one of them, tracing the deep grooves. It felt ancient, wrong somehow, like touching something I wasn't supposed to. Then I heard it. A single sharp snap of a branch. I spun around, rifle raised, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just the same overwhelming silence. I wasn't alone. I bolted back to the cabin, my heart hammering. By the time I got there, the sun had already dipped behind the trees, casting long, creeping shadows over the clearing. I shut the door, locking it tight. My pulse still pounded in my ears. And then, just as I started to catch my breath, I saw it. Right outside the cabin, carved deep into the wooden wall, were words that hadn't been there before. "You are not the only hunter here." My blood turned ice. Something had been right outside, watching me, and worse. It wanted me to know it. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every noise, every gust of wind against the cabin made my skin crawl. My rifle never left my hands. By the time the first light crept through the trees, I'd already made my decision. I was leaving. Whatever was out here wasn't human, and if it was, I didn't want to meet it. I grabbed my gear and stepped outside, my breath misting in the cold air. But the moment I turned toward the trail, my stomach dropped. My tracks from yesterday, gone. There should have been footprints leading from the cabin to the clearing to the trees, but the snow was untouched, smooth, as if I had never walked there at all. I felt exposed, trapped. Then the smell hit me, earthy, wet, rotten. I turned just in time to hear something move behind me, a low, heavy breath. I ran. I didn't look back. My only focus was getting to the truck, getting the hell out. The woods felt endless, stretching on longer than they should. No matter how fast I ran, the trail didn't feel right. The trees seemed closer, the shadows darker. And then, just like that, everything stopped. The smell, the noise, even the forest itself seemed to pause. I turned, rifle shaking in my grip. There was nothing there, just an expanse of untouched snow. But right before the woods swallowed me whole, I saw them, footprints, leading deeper into the forest. Not mine. And then, just like that, everything went black. Days later, search teams combed through Tongass National Forest looking for any trace of me. They found the cabin. They found my gear. But I was gone. No tracks. No signs of struggle. Just an empty cabin, its walls untouched. Except for one thing. The message carved into the wood was different now. Welcome to the hunt. Some say I got lost. that I wandered too far into the wilderness. Others whisper about the footprints, how they led deeper into the forest and then simply stopped. Like whatever left them had just vanished. Or maybe it never needed tracks to begin with. You ever get that feeling? The one where every instinct is screaming at you to turn around, but you ignore it because you don't want to look weak? Yeah. That's exactly what happened to me and Logan that day. It all started with a stupid idea. We were hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains, a trip we'd planned for weeks. Logan was the cautious one, always checking maps and making sure we stayed on marked trails. I, on the other hand, liked pushing limits. So when we found an old post on a forum about a hidden trail that supposedly led to something nobody's ever found before, I knew we had to go. Dude, this is literally the kind of stuff that gets people killed, Logan had said, shaking his head. Come on, man. What's the worst that could happen? I grinned, knowing exactly how to push him just enough to give in. It didn't take long before we veered off the main trail and into the unknown. At first, it was just like any other hike, overgrown paths, damp earth, the occasional rustle of wildlife. But then, something changed. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of our boots and our own breathing. Logan stopped. Miles, listen. I did. And that's when I noticed it. Silence. An unnatural, suffocating silence. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shook it off. It's just the trees blocking the wind. But deep down, I felt it too. Something was wrong. After what felt like an hour, we stumbled into a clearing. But this wasn't like the others we had passed. The grass here was too tall, the air too still, and something about it felt wrong. And then we saw it. A dirty old backpack, half buried under dead leaves in the center of the clearing. Logan hesitated. Dude, someone left that here. I walked over and picked it up. The material was stiff, weather-worn. I unzipped it, and inside was a small, battered notebook. I flipped through the pages, expecting camping notes or maybe a hiker's journal. But instead I found something else. The handwriting was frantic, words scrawled across the pages with shaky, uneven lines. Do not stay here. It sees you. The trees are lying. There is no way out. My stomach twisted. Logan, look at this. He read a few lines, his face going pale. Is this a joke? But then, at the bottom of the last page, something was written over and over again, getting messier and messier. It saw me. It saw me. It saw me. A gust of wind suddenly whipped through the clearing, rustling the trees for the first time all day. And that's when Logan turned around and whispered something I'll never forget. Miles, where's the trail? I looked up. He was right. The path we had come from was gone. My chest tightened. We had just walked in from that direction. I knew there had been a path. But now, nothing. Just an endless stretch of trees, their trunks closer together than I remembered. Logan swallowed hard. Miles, tell me you remember which way we came. I turned in circles, scanning the trees, the ground, anything that looked familiar. But the forest looked different now, tighter, denser. I pulled out my phone. No signal, no surprise. Logan did the same, tapping the screen furiously. GPS isn't working. My stomach churned. Okay, we'll just... Then we heard it. Footsteps, somewhere behind us. Slow, heavy, deliberate. We both froze. The steps stopped too. Logan turned to me, his voice low. Tell me that was an animal. I couldn't. The footsteps had sounded too human. Then, just as suddenly, the trees shifted. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like their trunks were moving, pressing closer together when we weren't looking. The clearing, the already tight space, was shrinking. "We need to get out of here," Logan muttered. I nodded. "Pick a direction. We run." He didn't argue. We ran. Branches scraped at my arms as we pushed through the underbrush, running in a straight line, hoping we'd hit a familiar trail. But the forest wasn't letting us go. The trees never ended. And then, crack. A loud snap echoed behind us. Something was close. We skidded to a stop, chests heaving. Logan shined his flashlight into the darkness. At first, we saw nothing. Just trees, leaves, the eerie stillness of the forest. Then, something moved. A tall, shadowy figure stood between the trees. Its body was too thin, its arms too long, stretching down past its knees. It had no face, just smooth, empty skin where features should be. My breath hitched. Then it tilted its head, a slow, unnatural movement, like it was studying us. And then, it stepped forward. "Run!" Logan screamed. We turned and sprinted, but the footsteps followed. Faster, louder, closer. I didn't dare look back. We needed to find a way out. But in my gut, I already knew. There was no way out. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they were on fire. But I couldn't stop running. Not with that thing right behind us. The trees blurred past, but no matter how far we ran, the footsteps never faded. They didn't sound rushed, just steady, measured. It wasn't chasing us. It was hurting us. And then, as if the forest itself had planned it, we stumbled into something new. A wooden structure, barely standing. A lookout point, old and rotting, half collapsed into the earth. But that wasn't what made my stomach turn. Beneath it, in the dirt, lay a pile of bones. I skidded to a stop, my breath ragged. Oh my God. Some were small, human. Others weren't. Logan grabbed my arm. "We have to keep moving." Crack. A branch snapped behind us. Logan swung the flashlight toward the sound. It was there. The thing was closer now, standing just at the tree line. It hadn't run. It hadn't rushed. It had just appeared. Too close. For the first time, I saw its fingers. Long, bone-thin. They twitched, just slightly, like it was waiting for something. Then I noticed the ground. It wasn't solid anymore. It felt soft, alive. I looked down and saw my feet sinking into the earth. No. Panic surged through me. I yanked my legs free and grabbed Logan, but his boots were already half buried in the ground. "It's pulling me down," he gasped. I dropped to my knees, digging at the dirt, fighting against whatever was underneath. Then, in a wild, desperate move, Logan did something insane. He pulled out his knife and slashed his own arm. Blood dripped onto the earth, and for just 1 second, everything stopped. The trees shuddered, the air shifted, the thing in the woods paused. That was our chance. We ran. We ran until our legs almost gave out, until the trees finally thinned, and up ahead, we saw it. A bridge, a narrow, rotting wooden bridge stretching over a dried-up creek bed. I didn't question it. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. As we reached the middle, a sound tore through the forest. A scream, not human, not animal, something else. The bridge shook under our weight, but we didn't stop. We crossed, and the second our feet hit solid ground on the other side, the scream stopped. I turned around. The creature was gone. The clearing? Gone. Everything we had just run through vanished. I pulled out my phone, heart hammering. The GPS was back. The clock on my screen said it was still 5:42 p.m. Somehow, no time had passed. Neither of us spoke the entire way back to town. That night, as I sat in my bed, I finally checked my photos from the hike. Most were normal. Trees. Logan laughing. The clearing. And then, at the very end, a photo I didn't remember taking. It was blurry, dark, but I could still see it. A figure, standing right behind us, watching, waiting, like it knew, like it was still there, like it wasn't done with us yet. I've always loved running at night. There's something about the silence, the crisp air, the feeling of being the only person in the world. No cars, no distractions. Just me and the endless trail stretching through the Olympic National Forest. I started this routine 2 years ago. At first it was just for exercise, but over time it became more than that. It was a ritual, a way to clear my head. Most nights I'd run the same 5-mile loop, my breath syncing with the rhythm of my feet hitting the dirt path. I knew every bend, every fallen log, every flicker of moonlight through the dense canopy. And then one night, he was there. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, an odd shadow cast by the trees. But as I rounded a curve in the path, I saw him clearly. A tall man, standing dead center in the middle of the trail. A wide-brimmed hat, a black suit, completely still. I slowed down, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hey," I called out. No response. Maybe he was a lost hiker or a park ranger, but something about him felt off. I glanced at my watch, 12:17 a.m. This wasn't normal. No one else ran this late. I took a cautious step forward. That's when I noticed something chilling. No matter how many steps I took, the distance between us never changed. The next morning, I told Zane about it. "You were probably just seeing things, man," he said, stirring his coffee. "Your brain was tired. You ever get those sleep-deprived hallucinations?" I shook my head. It wasn't a hallucination, Z. He was there. Zane smirked. "So you're telling me some guy in a freaking suit and hat just stood in the middle of the forest all night waiting for you?" I exhaled sharply. "I don't know what I'm saying. I just know what I saw." Zane leaned back in his chair. "All right then, go prove it." And that's how I ended up back on the trail the next night, a GoPro strapped to my chest. I kept my pace steady, my breath controlled. The camera's red light blinked, recording everything. Then, up ahead, he was there again. Same posture, same hat, same eerie stillness. I forced myself to run faster, my heart pounding. But no matter how much ground I covered, he never got closer, and he never got farther. The realization sent ice through my veins. This wasn't a man. This was something else. I stopped dead in my tracks. The only sound was my own breathing, heavy and uneven. The trees around me swayed gently, their leaves whispering in the wind. But it, stood completely still. I felt a primal urge to turn around, to run back the way I came. But something in me, curiosity, stubbornness, maybe even stupidity, kept me rooted to the spot. I lifted my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, landing directly on him. That's when I realized something even more disturbing. No details, no face, just blackness beneath the brim of that hat. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. No response. I took a slow step forward, gripping the straps of my GoPro. Another step. Still nothing. Then, the forest went silent. The wind stopped. The rustling leaves froze in place. No crickets. No distant howls of coyotes. Just an unnatural, suffocating stillness. My ears rang from the sudden absence of sound, and then my flashlight flickered. For a split second, everything went dark. And when the beam steadied again, he was closer. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking. No footsteps, no movement. Just there, closer. I turned and sprinted. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, my breath burning in my lungs. Branches whipped against my arms as I veered off the trail, crashing through the underbrush. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how many turns I took, he never moved. Or rather, he never had to. I made the mistake of glancing back, and my blood turned to ice. The GoPro was still strapped to my chest, recording everything. But through the tiny reflection in the screen, I saw it. He was always the same distance behind me, like he was tethered to me. Or worse, like distance didn't matter. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard. The impact sent the GoPro flying, tumbling through the dirt. It landed facing the trail, still recording. And as I scrambled to my feet, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Frame by frame, he was getting closer. But he wasn't walking. He wasn't moving. He was just there. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were sinking into the earth. The GoPro lay in the dirt, the red light blinking, still recording. I forced myself to move, to grab it. My fingers closed around the strap, and as I lifted it, the lens caught something. He was right in front of me, not inches away, not an arm's length, right there. A black suit, a wide-brimmed hat, and where a face should have been, nothing. Just empty darkness deeper than anything I'd ever seen. A void that swallowed the light. My breath came in short gasps. I could feel it, him, pressing against me, though he never moved. I took a shaky step back, then another. But how? How are you here? The words ripped from my throat before I could stop them. The GoPro caught it all. The second the words left my mouth, a sharp, deafening static exploded in my ears. And then, nothing. Days later, they found my GoPro near the trail. But not me. No footprints. No signs of a struggle. Just the camera, face down in the dirt, battery dead. Zane was the one who got the footage. He told himself he wouldn't watch it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. He clicked play. At first it was just my breathing, my footsteps crunching against the forest floor. Then my panicked screams. And then, silence. And yet, the video kept going. For nearly 10 minutes, the GoPro recorded something. The screen was black, but the audio, a whisper. Not in English, not in any language Zane could recognize. He shut the laptop, his hands shaking. That night, he tossed and turned, trying to shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Then at 3:17 a.m., his phone lit up with a notification. Motion detected outside. Zane's heart pounded as he hesitated, then checked the security camera feed. And there, standing perfectly still on the sidewalk outside his window, was a man in a black suit, a wide-brimmed hat, and no face. I don't believe in ghost stories. At least that's what I used to tell myself. I've been a journalist for years, covering everything from small-town crime to bizarre urban legends. But when I heard about the disappearing fisherman in Louisiana's Atchafalaya swamp, something about it stuck with me. A melody that drifts through the trees at night. A woman in white, floating over the water. And every time someone tries to follow the song, they vanish without a trace. The only thing left behind? A pearl necklace with a note. Thank you for listening. I needed to know if this was some elaborate hoax or if there was actually something lurking in those waters. That's how I ended up in a dimly lit bar near the swamp, nursing a beer and waiting for a man named Tommy Boudreau, one of the last people to see one of the missing men alive. Tommy looked rough, weathered skin, calloused hands, eyes that had seen too much. He slid into the seat across from me, barely looking up. "You don't want to go out there, man," he muttered. I pulled out my recorder. "Tell me why." He sighed, rubbing his temple like he was already regretting this conversation. "It's real," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Caleb Reed. He was my best friend. He went out on the water after sundown, just like the others. Thought it was all a joke." I leaned in. "And what happened?" Tommy exhaled, staring at the table. "We found his boat the next morning, floating near the cypress trees. No signs of a struggle, no blood, just that damn necklace. And the note." I took a sip of my drink, keeping my face neutral. A coincidence? Maybe he just... Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "You don't get it. I saw her, man." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "The woman in white?" He nodded slowly. "She's not human. And that song, it ain't just music. It gets inside your head, calls to you. I let his words sink in. Either Tommy was the best liar I'd ever met, or he was genuinely terrified. Either way, I had to see for myself. "Take me out there," I said. Tommy slammed his drink down and stood up. "You want to end up like Caleb? Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." That night, I found myself sitting in a small wooden boat, the oars dipping into the inky black water. The swamp stretched around us like a living thing, its breath slow and humid, the trees towering overhead like silent watchers. Tommy rode in silence, his jaw tight. I kept my recorder on, listening to the distant hum of crickets and the occasional splash of something unseen beneath us. Then, it started. A sound drifted through the trees, soft and sorrowful. A woman's voice humming a melody that sent goosebumps up my arms. It wasn't just eerie. It was beautiful. Tommy tensed, gripping the oars tighter. "Turn the boat around. Now." I grabbed my flashlight, scanning the water. "Where's it coming from?" Tommy cursed under his breath. "Doesn't matter. You don't listen to it." But I couldn't help it. The song tugged at something deep inside me, like a half-forgotten memory, a lullaby from childhood. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw her, a figure standing on the water, pale skin, a dress flowing like mist around her. Her head tilted slightly, her gaze locked onto mine. A slow, creeping dread settled in my chest. She was smiling, and then she started walking toward us. I couldn't move. The woman stepped across the water like it was solid ground, her bare feet barely causing a ripple. Her dress billowed around her as if caught in an invisible breeze, but the air was completely still. The melody grew louder, closer. "Don't look at her," Tommy hissed. His hands were white-knuckled around the oars. I should have listened. Instead, I did the exact opposite. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I slowly lifted it toward her face. The beam flickered over pale skin, delicate features, and she had no eyes, just hollow, endless sockets, black as the water beneath us. A wave of nausea hit me. My vision blurred at the edges, and for a second I felt myself leaning forward, as if something was pulling me. Then, the boat lurched violently. "Row!" Tommy shouted, snapping me out of it. I barely had time to react before the woman vanished into the mist. The song cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of our boat slicing through the water as Tommy paddled with frantic speed. My heart slammed against my ribs. Where did she go? Tommy didn't answer. He just kept rowing. Harder, faster. And that's when I felt it. Something grabbed my ankle. A cold, wet grip tightened around my leg, yanking me toward the edge of the boat. I kicked wildly, my breath catching in my throat as I felt fingers, actual fingers, curl around my skin, pulling me downward. "Get it off! Get it off!" I shouted. Tommy reached for me, but before he could grab my arm, the boat tilted violently to one side. Water rushed over the edges, soaking my clothes as I struggled against the invisible force dragging me toward the depths. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the grip vanished. I collapsed onto the wooden planks, gasping. My ankle throbbed, but when I yanked my pant leg up, there was nothing there. No mark, no bruise, nothing. Tommy was already rowing again, his face twisted with fear. "We're getting the hell out of here." I didn't argue. The rest of the trip back was silent. The only sound was the distant croaking of frogs and the occasional splash of fish in the water. When we finally reached the dock, Tommy jumped out first, pulling the boat onto the shore. "You still think it's just a legend?" he asked. I swallowed hard, my mind still racing. No, this wasn't a legend. It was real. And whatever that thing was, it knew me now. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the way she moved, the empty sockets where her eyes should have been. The way the song seemed to reach inside my skull, twisting something deep in my chest. And worst of all, I could still hear it. Even now, lying in my motel bed with the covers pulled up to my chin, the melody whispered through my mind. Soft, gentle, calling. I sat up, rubbing my face. I needed answers. The next morning, I met Tommy at the docks. He looked worse than I felt. His eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered as I approached. I ignored him and pulled out my recorder. "Tell me everything you know about her." Tommy hesitated, glancing around like he expected someone, or something, to be listening. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke. "Her name was Eloise Fournier," he said. "Back in the 1800s, she was accused of witchcraft. People said she was luring men to their deaths, drowning them in the swamp." My stomach tightened. "Was it true?" Tommy shook his head. "No one knows. But they didn't care. They tied rocks to her ankles and threw her into the water. Before she went under, she cursed this place, said she'd take every man who ignored her song." A chill ran down my spine. "So, what happens if you listen?" Tommy's jaw tightened. "You disappear. No body, no struggle, just gone." I thought about the missing fishermen, the boats left adrift, the pearl necklaces, and the note. "Thank you for listening." I exhaled slowly. "I have to go back." Tommy's eyes widened. "Are you insane? You barely made it out last night." But I wasn't listening. I needed to hear the song again. That night, I took a boat alone. I knew it was stupid, reckless, but I couldn't stop myself. The swamp was even darker than before, the trees looming like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The air was thick with the scent of moss and damp wood. I drifted deeper into the water, letting the current pull me. And then, just like before, the song began. A chill ran through my body as the melody wrapped around me, soft and sorrowful. I gripped the oars, scanning the mist. "Where are you?" I whispered. A shape emerged from the fog. She was closer this time. Her head tilted slightly, her empty eyes locked onto mine. The song grew louder, more urgent, and then she spoke. "You came back." A cold dread settled in my stomach. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It wasn't even a sound. It was inside my head. I tried to move, but my body refused. She stepped forward, her bare feet hovering just above the water's surface. "You listened," she murmured. "You understand." I didn't. I didn't understand anything. But before I could react, something cold wrapped around my wrists. I looked down. The water was rising. I was sinking. I couldn't breathe. The water was pulling me down, wrapping around my wrists like unseen hands. My chest tightened as panic set in. I kicked wildly, trying to break free, but it was useless. My body felt heavy, too heavy. Above me, she watched, silent, waiting. Then, through the fog of my mind, I remembered the pearl necklace. I fumbled in my pocket, fingers trembling, and pulled out the single black pearl I had taken from Caleb's belongings. "You lost this," I choked out. For the first time, her expression changed. The song wavered. The grip on my wrists loosened. She reached for the pearl, her translucent fingers brushing against my palm. A flicker of something passed through her face. Pain, longing, sorrow. And then, she was gone. The water fell away. My boat rocked violently as I gasped for air. I was alive. The next morning, Tommy found me on the shore, soaked and shaking. I didn't speak, just opened my fist, revealing the pearl. His face paled. "She let you go." I nodded. Tied around my wrist was a delicate necklace, its note fluttering in the breeze. "Thank you for listening." And from deep in the swamp, the song began again. I've worked as a park ranger for over 10 years. I've seen things, strange lights in the sky, People who go missing without a trace, even heard voices where there should be none. But nothing, and I mean nothing, ever got under my skin like what happened deep in the Great Smoky Mountains. It started with a call from the control station. "Holloway, you need to check this out. We got something weird on camera 6. We had motion-activated cameras scattered throughout the park, mostly to catch illegal hunters or hikers wandering off trail. But when I pulled up the footage from camera 6, it wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal either. Between the trees, barely visible in the dim light, was a face. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. The longer I stared, the more I realized something was wrong. The features were off, stretched like a warped mask pressed against glass. And yet, when I fast-forwarded through the footage, it never moved. It was just there. The other rangers had already checked it out but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. Just a single wooden chair facing a tree. Something about that didn't sit right with me. So I told them I'd check it out myself. I packed up my truck and drove into the forest as the sun dipped below the horizon. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no insects, just the low hum of my tires against the dirt road. Then my radio crackled. At first, just static. Then, something else. A faint, garbled voice, barely above a whisper. "You see me." I froze, gripping the wheel. My pulse hammered in my ears. The voice faded. I shook it off, told myself it was a glitch, and kept driving. By the time I reached the camera's location, the forest was drowned in darkness. My flashlight cut through the trees, and there it was. The chair, old weathered, sitting in the exact spot from the footage. But the face? Gone. I stepped closer. The chair was positioned directly in front of a massive oak tree. But the bark, it was too smooth, like something had rubbed against it for hours. Then, I noticed something else. No footprints. I felt my skin crawl. Behind me, the leaves rustled. I turned my flashlight toward the noise, but nothing was there. Just trees stretching endlessly into the night. Then, click, the sound of wood shifting. I spun back around. The chair had tipped over. My radio crackled again, the same voice, but this time clearer. "Now I see you too." My breath hitched. I scanned the trees, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. No movement, no sign of anyone. But that voice, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't static. Someone, or something, was here. I crouched near the chair, my fingers brushing against the wood. It was ice cold despite the warm night air. The ground beneath it was bare, no footprints, no scuff marks, as if it had been there forever. Then I saw them. Drag marks. Faint, almost unnoticeable in the dirt, leading away from the tree. I followed them cautiously, hand resting on my gun, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. A few yards in, the marks just stopped. No sign of disturbance beyond that point, as if whatever had been dragged had simply vanished. My flashlight flickered. A chill ran down my spine. For a brief moment, my own shadow stretched unnaturally long, far beyond where it should have ended, bending and distorting like something was standing behind me. I whirled around. Nothing. Then the chair creaked behind me. I turned just in time to see it tip back upright on its own. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I bolted back toward my truck, but somehow, I wasn't where I thought I was. The truck should have been right in front of me. But it wasn't. I had been walking in circles. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice was deeper, guttural. "You saw me. Now I can see you too." A burst of static, then silence. I could feel it now. That suffocating weight pressing on my chest, like a set of unseen eyes locking onto me from all directions. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned back toward the chair, half expecting to see someone sitting in it, but it was empty. The forest around me had gone completely still. No wind, no insects, no sound at all. And then, My truck's headlights flared to life. Relief flooded through me as I sprinted toward it, jumping in and slamming the door shut. The moment I locked it, I looked up. Something stood just beyond the tree line, not moving, not blinking. Its face was blurred like a smear on glass. The headlights should have illuminated it, but they didn't. The darkness around it was wrong. I jammed the truck into reverse, speeding away as fast as the wheels would take me. But as I glanced in the mirror, it was still there. The trees blurred, the road twisting under my tires. But the thing never got smaller. It didn't chase me. It didn't need to. It was watching, and it knew I had seen it. I didn't stop driving until I reached the ranger station. I must have run 2 red lights on the way back, but I didn't care. My hands were shaking as I parked the truck, slamming the door behind me. The night air felt thick, suffocating. Inside, the station was empty except for a single desk lamp casting weak light over the surveillance monitors. I went straight to the live feed from camera 6. The chair was still there. The tree was still there. But the thing, it was gone. I exhaled, running a hand down my face. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But something gnawed at me. I rewound the footage. I watched myself arrive, flashlight in hand. The chair was tipped over. I saw myself hesitate, look around, then pick it up. I fast-forwarded a few minutes, me standing there looking at the tree. Then I paused. My stomach turned to ice. There, in the trees behind me, just out of the flashlight's reach, was the same blurred figure. It had been there the whole time. A sharp breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned to the station window, my reflection barely visible against the darkness outside. Then the radio crackled again. The voice was clear now, not garbled, not distorted, just a slow, deliberate whisper. "It doesn't matter where you go. I can see you now." The power flickered. The room plunged into darkness. For a moment, nothing but silence. Then, on the monitor, the live feed came back on, and there, staring back at me from the screen, was my own reflection. But it wasn't moving the way I was.